I remember the exact moment I realized something wasn't right on the farm. The night was cold, too cold, even for late October, but that wasn't what unsettled me. It was the silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, thick enough to make your thoughts feel like they're too loud. I had just moved to the small rural property in Kentucky a few weeks ago. The farm had been abandoned for years before I found it. The owner, an old man named Jack Rutherford, apparently passing away without much of a trace. No family, no heirs, just this crumbling piece of land that seemed to be forgotten by time. People told me it was a bargain, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I needed to get away from city life, from people, from the noise. The first few days were peaceful. It was hard work, clearing the overgrown fields, fixing up the barn, and getting the animals settled, but nothing out of the ordinary. But then, on the third week, something changed. It started with the noises at night. At first, I thought it was the wind, the creaky old barn, or the raccoons that had been rummaging through the trash. But the noises, they didn't stop. Footsteps, the sound of someone walking around outside my bedroom window at 2 a.m. Not animal footsteps, not something wild. Human footsteps, heavy, methodical, almost deliberate. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, the isolation getting to me. But that night I saw something. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping on some coffee after a long day of working the fields. The farmhouse was dimly lit, but I could make out the shape of something moving outside. A shadow in the moonlight. I froze, staring at it. It wasn't the usual animal shape. This was too tall, too deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight, my heart racing as I crept toward the door. Just as I was about to step outside, I heard a faint whisper. A voice, barely audible but unmistakable, came from behind the barn. "Help me." The voice sounded familiar, but that didn't make sense. There was no one around for miles. I called out, but no answer. Hesitant, I stepped out onto the porch, the cold biting into my skin. The night air was thick with fog, the kind that rolls in off the nearby hills, swallowing everything in its path. I moved toward the barn, my flashlight beam cutting through the haze. My feet crunched on the wet ground as I approached the back. Then I saw it. Something was lying in the dirt, half hidden by the tall grass. I thought it was a person, a man, hunched over, trembling in the cold. I ran toward it, heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a person. It was a bundle of clothing, soaked with something dark. Blood? I didn't want to know. And then, from behind the barn, I heard that whisper again. But this time it was different. It was louder, closer. I spun around, but no one was there. Suddenly, the sound of something scraping against metal made me jump. The old rusted gate on the side of the property was opening, but there was no one near it. The gate swung slowly, as if someone was pushing it from the other side, or something. The adrenaline surged through me. My breath quickened as I backed away, every hair on my body standing on end. The farm, it seemed, was not as abandoned as I thought. Something was out there, and it wasn't looking for company. The night felt colder, even though I didn't think it was possible. My mind raced as I stood there, frozen in place, staring at the slowly swaying gate. The rusted hinges creaked in the wind as if inviting me to take a closer look. But I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to turn and run, to get back inside the house and lock every door. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Curiosity, I guess, or maybe fear. I turned back to the barn, scanning the shadows once again. The shape of the bundle was still there. It didn't move. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step closer to it. The stench of decay hit me before I even got to it. It wasn't just blood. It was something worse, rotting, something that had been left too long. I knelt beside it, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The pile of clothes was soaked, stained beyond recognition. But beneath the fabric, I could see skin, pale and lifeless. My mind screamed at me to run, to forget this, to go back inside and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. That's when I noticed it. On the back of the bundle, there was something carved into the skin, jagged and irregular. It was a symbol, a word maybe, but it didn't make sense. It looked almost like something someone had scratched into the skin with their bare hands. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, without warning, I heard a sound. A low groan, almost like a whisper, but deeper, guttural. It was coming from the woods behind the farm. I stood up, my legs shaking, and I turned in the direction of the noise. I couldn't see anything through the fog, but I could feel it. Something was watching me. That's when I heard it again, louder this time, like someone calling my name. Jack, Jack, but it wasn't my name. The voice, barely audible at first, was now unmistakable. It wasn't Jack Rutherford, the previous owner of the farm. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a voice I had never heard before, a voice that sounded wrong, like it didn't belong. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as panic set in. My flashlight flickered in my hand, its weak beam cutting through the fog as I tried to find the source of the voice. But nothing, just more silence. The trees were still, the night eerily quiet except for the soft groaning, like something was moving in the distance. But I couldn't see anything. Then, as I turned to leave, my foot hit something. I looked down, my blood running cold. It was a set of footprints, small, too small to be an adult's, and they were leading toward the barn. They were fresh, the wet soil still shifting under them. I looked back up toward the barn door, my chest tight with dread. It was open now, just slightly. Something was in there, waiting. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I started walking toward the barn, slowly, cautiously, as if the very air was holding its breath. As I reached the door, I hesitated, staring into the dark interior. The smell of rot and decay was stronger now, overpowering. And then, in the dim light, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But no. There, at the far corner of the barn, crouched in the shadows, was a figure. Person. Or at least, it looked like a person. I couldn't make out any features. It was just a shape, a silhouette, hunched over in an unnatural position. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It was like it was waiting for me to approach. And yet, I could feel its presence, like it was staring directly at me. My throat tightened. I was paralyzed with fear. I should have turned and ran. I should have grabbed my keys and gone straight to the nearest town. But instead, I took another step forward. The figure's head jerked up, as if it was snapping out of some trance. Its eyes, no, not eyes, but dark, hollow sockets, locked onto mine. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. It opened its mouth wide, too wide, and let out a scream, a sound so unnatural, so filled with agony, that it shattered the silence of the farm like glass. I bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't care to see what it was or what was in the barn. My legs carried me back toward the house faster than I'd ever moved in my life. I slammed the door shut behind me, locked every window, every door. But as I stood there, panting, staring into the dark, I heard something. Soft, almost inaudible, scratching, on the outside of the house. And then the voice again. Jack, Jack. It was closer now. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my pulse racing, ears straining to hear any sound that would explain the scratching. My breath came in shallow bursts, a fog forming in the cold air of the house. I pressed my back against the wall, every inch of me on alert, waiting for the next noise, the next movement. But the house was still eerily so, save for that soft scraping sound. It seemed to come from all around me, the walls, the windows, the door. I turned slowly, scanning every inch of the room, half expecting to see something watching me from the shadows. I wanted to scream, to break down the door and run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as though the farm had grown into me, anchoring me to the spot, trapping me. The longer I stood there, the more I felt like a rat in a maze, waiting for the next trap to snap shut. Then the scratching stopped. The silence was deafening. I dared not move, not wanting to make a sound that might draw whatever thing was out there closer. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, the blood rushing in my veins, but other than that, there was nothing. No wind outside, no animals, nothing. Suddenly, the sound of something heavy scraping across the floor broke the stillness. Came from upstairs. The floorboards creaked under the weight, dragging with an unnatural, uneven rhythm. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the old, rusty flashlight from the kitchen counter and crept toward the stairs. Every step I took seemed to echo in the dead silence of the house. The stairs groaned under my weight, as if warning me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to find out what it was, even if that meant facing whatever had been lurking in the barn. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before me, dark and foreboding. I could just make out the outline of the door to the master bedroom slightly ajar. The source of the noise was coming from that room. The door creaked open on its own, the hinges protesting with an agonizing squeal. I stepped forward cautiously, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. Just as my fingers brushed the knob, the door swung wide open with a violent jerk, as though someone had shoved it from the inside. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. In the center of the room was a chair, an old, worn-out rocking chair. It was rocking by itself. I don't know how long I stood there, my body frozen, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The rocking chair moved slowly back and forth, creaking with every motion. And then, I noticed something else. The bed was not empty. There was a figure in it, a shape under the covers. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting the blankets, but then I saw it clearly. The figure wasn't still. It was moving, shifting, twitching, like someone was struggling beneath the sheets, trying to get out. I took a step closer, my feet heavy and unwilling to cooperate. My flashlight flickered once, casting brief, jagged shadows across the room. That's when I saw it. A hand, pale and bony, sticking out from under the blanket. Its fingers were twisted, elongated, like someone's hand had been bent in ways it shouldn't be. My stomach turned. This wasn't human. This wasn't even close to being human. I wanted to scream, to run, but some force, held me in place. The figure in the bed didn't move, but I could feel its presence. It was aware of me somehow. I wasn't alone in this house anymore. Then, a voice, soft and cold, echoed in my mind. It wasn't the whispering from before. It was something worse. Come closer. I didn't want to. My feet wouldn't move, but my body felt pulled toward the bed. My mind screamed at me to stop, to leave, but my legs ignored it. Every instinct I had told me to turn and run, to break free from whatever grip this place had on me. But I couldn't. I was inches away from the bed when the figure under the covers moved again, this time faster, jerking violently as if whatever was inside had suddenly been awakened. The blanket flew off the bed, revealing the creature in full. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Skin stretched tight over skeletal limbs, eyes black and empty, its mouth opening wide, showing rows of broken teeth. It wasn't alive, not in the way I understood life. It was an aberration, a thing between worlds. Before I could react, it lunged at me. Its mouth opened wider, a sound like a scream escaping its throat. The creature's bony fingers dug into my arm, pulling me toward its twisted face. My heart pounded in my chest, but I managed to break free, stumbling backward. I crashed into the wall, knocking a picture frame to the floor. I barely had time to recover before I heard it again. The voice, now louder and closer. You should have never come here. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, my legs moving faster than they ever had before, desperate to escape whatever had been awakened in that room. The house was no longer just a place. It had become a prison, and I was its latest victim. I didn't stop running until I reached the front door. I didn't bother with the flashlight anymore. I couldn't focus on anything except the cold, suffocating feeling of being pursued. My pulse thundered in my ears, each thud of my heart more deafening than the last. I could still feel the thing's fingers on my arm, cold and sharp, even though I had broken free. Its presence clung to me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I threw open the door and sprinted outside, the night air hitting my lungs like ice. The farm had transformed in the few minutes since I'd been inside. The fog had thickened, rolling in like some malevolent force, swallowing everything in its path. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. The gate. I had to make it to the gate. The gravel path leading away from the house felt like it was stretching on forever, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick fog that had now settled around me. I could still hear it, the scraping, the whispering, the low, guttural sound coming from somewhere behind me. Something was out there, watching, waiting. I ran faster, my breath ragged in the damp night air, my feet slipping on the uneven ground. The farm seemed to stretch out endlessly, the barns, the fields, the trees, all blurred into a shapeless, formless mass in the fog. It was as if the land itself had turned against me, pulling me deeper into its twisted embrace. I reached the gate, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the rusted lock. The metal was cold and slick with dew. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. I wasn't alone. I could feel it behind me, closing in. The lock clicked open with a sickening sound, and I threw the gate wide, not caring how loud the sound was. I ran down the gravel road that led away from the farm, not looking back, not daring to look back. I could hear the wind howling now, almost as if the farm itself was screaming. But then, something stopped me. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the night air, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. The whisper came again, this time louder, clearer. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real. Jack, I froze. I turned slowly, my body locking up in fear, but I couldn't see anything in the thick fog. The air felt heavier now, oppressive. I heard the sound of something moving, something big, something far too large to be human. It was coming from the barn. For some reason, I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were stuck to the earth, the weight of the farm pressing down on me. My eyes searched the fog desperately, but I couldn't see anything, just that oppressive darkness. Then I saw it, a shape, barely visible through the mist, standing in front of the barn. It was tall, too tall, and it didn't move like a person. It was hunched, its shoulders wide, its arms long and twisted in unnatural angles. I should have run. I should have turned and fled, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was as though I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape, unable to wake up. Then it stepped forward, and that was when I saw its face, or rather, the lack of one. Where its face should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty, gaping hole, black as the night itself. The edges of its head were jagged, torn as if something had ripped it open, and from the hole, I could hear the sound of breath, slow and labored, like something ancient, something wrong, was sucking air from the very life force of the land itself. The fog around it shifted, swirling unnaturally, as if it were drawn to the figure. It took another step forward, and I could feel the ground beneath me tremble, like the very earth was quaking in fear. Leave. The voice was low, guttural, like the growl of an animal, but it carried an undeniable command. The air around me seemed to grow colder, heavier, suffocating. I could barely breathe. I knew then that I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to survive this. But something in me, something deep, primal, fought against that voice, that presence, and I took one shaky step back, then another, and then I turned and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, the gate still wide open behind me. I didn't care if it saw me. I didn't care if it was coming for me. The farm could keep its secrets, its horrors. I was getting out. As I sprinted down the gravel road, I looked back once. The fog was rolling in, swallowing the barn, the farmhouse, the land itself. The figure was gone, but I didn't feel safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, somewhere watching, waiting. I didn't stop running until I reached the town. I didn't stop until I found a phone, and even then, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial the number. The officer who answered the phone said there had been no reports of anything unusual, no missing persons, no strange occurrences. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That farm wasn't just abandoned. It was cursed. Something dark had settled there long ago, and it had never left. I'm telling you this, not because I want to frighten you, but because I want you to understand. That place, it never lets go. It's been weeks since I left that farm, but the nightmares haven't stopped. They come every night without fail, pulling me back into that cold, suffocating fog, into the barn with that thing standing in the doorway, staring at me with those empty, gaping sockets. But the worst part? I still hear it. The whispers. They don't go away. I know it sounds insane, but I'm telling you, it's still out there. Something is still on that land. And I know because it's been reaching for me. After the call to the sheriff, I didn't go back. Couldn't. But even when I moved into a new place, into the city, into a more populated area where people could see me, it followed. At first, I thought I was just losing my mind, that the isolation, the fear was messing with me. But it wasn't. The nightmares weren't just nightmares. They were warnings. One night, about 2 weeks after I left the farm, I woke up to a loud thudding at my door. I thought I was dreaming at first, but the thudding grew louder, relentless, like something was trying to break down the door. I scrambled out of bed, my heart racing, adrenaline flooding my veins. I could hear the whispers, the same voice from the farm, now louder than before. You left, but you cannot escape. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a baseball bat I kept by the door, and I crept toward the front of the apartment. The thudding continued, rhythmic, unervingly patient. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. Just a deep, suffocating silence that seemed to fill the entire hallway. That's when I saw it. The ground beneath my feet was wet, like someone had tracked mud through the building. But it wasn't just mud. It was black, dark as oil, and it was spreading, creeping under the door, under the walls, like it had been there for hours, maybe longer. I followed it, my hand trembling as I traced the dark streaks down the hallway. They led me to a window, the one I'd left slightly open to let in some air. I glanced out, and that's when I saw it. The fog. It was back, rolling in from the distance, thick and unnatural, just like that night on the farm. And there, in the mist, I saw the same figure. The thing with no face. It was standing there, at the edge of the parking lot, just watching me, unmoving. I slammed the window shut, my hands slick with sweat, but I knew then, it hadn't been a coincidence. It had been following me all along, waiting for the right moment to pull me back in. The next morning, I went to the police. They didn't take me seriously, of course. They just said it was probably a bad dream, maybe I had imagined it all. But they didn't understand. They didn't feel it. The weight of the land, the oppressive darkness that had clung to me, followed me, since that night on the farm. I went back to the farm, desperate to find answers. I wasn't going to leave until I knew what had happened, what I had stumbled upon. I thought that maybe the truth would make it stop, make it all make sense. But when I got there, I realized it was too late. The farm was abandoned again. The house had been boarded up, the fields overgrown with weeds, as though no one had been there for years. There was no sign of the creature, no evidence that anything had ever happened at all. It was like the place had erased its own history, as if it wanted to forget. But then I saw it, the barn. The same barn that had been the source of all the horrors, the place where I had seen that thing. I knew I had to go back in, that I had to face whatever it was that had been waiting there. So I did. The barn was empty. The stench of decay still lingered in the air, but there was nothing there. No shape in the shadows, no twisted creature, no sign of anything that could explain the terror I had felt. But I still felt it, the presence, the thing that had been following me. And then I heard it, faintly at first, but growing louder. A whisper, a voice. You can never leave. I turned, heart pounding, but there was nothing. No one. Just the wind rustling the old timbers of the barn. It took everything in me to leave that place, to drive away from the farm. But I know what I saw. I know what was out there, and I know it's still out there, watching. I don't know if I'll ever be free, but I wanted to tell someone, to warn anyone who might be tempted to step foot on that cursed land. The farm isn't just abandoned. It's alive. It feeds. And if you ever find yourself on the outskirts of Kentucky, If you ever stumble across a piece of land that feels wrong, turn back. It's not worth it, because if you don't, it will find you, and you will never leave. I wish I could say that everything ended after I left the farm. I wish I could tell you that the nightmares stopped, that the whispers faded, that I could go on with my life like I had before. But I can't. The truth is, it only got worse. I thought moving away would help, that if I put enough distance between myself and that land, I could escape whatever had latched onto me. But the thing is, it never really lets go. The nightmares turned into something else. At first, it was just the same reoccurring dream. A dark, foggy landscape, the barn in the distance, that creature standing in the doorway, waiting for me. But then it started to follow me into the waking world. The shadows, the whispers, the feeling that someone was always behind me. They didn't just exist when I was asleep anymore. They were with me everywhere. I couldn't go into crowded places anymore. I couldn't sit in a cafe or walk down a busy street without the feeling of eyes on me. Invisible, but there. And every time I looked over my shoulder, the fog was waiting, creeping in, surrounding me. But the worst part? It was in the reflection. One night, I caught myself in the mirror while brushing my teeth, and for a split second, I didn't see myself. I saw the figure, the thing from the farm. It was standing behind me, tall and distorted, like something twisted in the reflection. I spun around, my breath catching, but there was nothing there. Just my empty apartment, the same quiet room. But then, in the corner of the mirror, I saw it again. The hand, pale and bony, reaching toward me, almost as if it were trying to drag me back into that darkness. I didn't know what to do anymore. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend that I wasn't losing my mind, but the thing was getting stronger. It was like the farm had imprinted itself on me, like I had been marked, and now I couldn't escape it. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I got a letter. It was simple, no return address, just my name, scrawled across the front in jagged, uneven handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, the paper creaking in my grip. Inside was a single sentence: "You should have never left." First, I thought it was a sick joke, a prank. But then, the feeling came again, the pressure, the suffocating weight of being watched. I thought about that cursed farm, about the land, about the thing that had followed me all this time. And I realized it wasn't over. I had been foolish. I had thought I could outrun it. But there's no escaping what's been tied to the land. The farm, the thing in the barn, the dark presence that had twisted everything around it. It wasn't done with me. It was never done with me. The next few nights were the worst. The whispers grew louder, clearer. I could hear them even when I wasn't asleep. They came from the walls, from the corners of my apartment, from the cracks in the windows. "Come back. It's waiting." I tried to fight it. I tried to ignore it, but the pull grew stronger with every passing day. And then one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard it. A knock. It was soft at first, just a light tapping on the window. Then it grew louder, more insistent, until it was a pounding, as though something or someone was trying to break through the glass. I stumbled out of bed, terrified to look, but unable to stop myself. I parted the curtains, and what I saw almost made me collapse. It was standing there, in the fog, the same figure, tall, dark, empty. And this time it wasn't just watching. It was smiling. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate. I ran out the back door, not even grabbing my jacket or shoes. I ran through the dark streets, the whispers calling after me, growing louder with every step. But no matter how far I ran, no matter how fast I moved, I could still feel it behind me, closing in. I don't know what happened after that. I lost track of time. I lost track of reality. Everything around me became a blur of fog, shadows, and a feeling of being pushed back toward the farm, toward the barn. I woke up the next morning in the middle of a field. I didn't recognize it. There were no signs, no markers, just endless stretches of land. The fog had lifted, but the air was thick with something I couldn't explain. My body ached as though I had been running for days. And in the distance, through the haze, I saw it, the barn. I didn't want to go closer. I didn't want to see what was inside. but I knew I had no choice. I couldn't fight it anymore. I had been brought back whether I liked it or not. When I stepped through the barn door, I was greeted by the same cold, the same oppressive feeling that had consumed me the first time. The creature was waiting, standing in the shadows, its face still hidden, its presence feeling more ancient, more malevolent than ever. But now I knew. It wasn't about the farm. It wasn't about the land. It was about me. The creature stepped forward, its hollow eyes finally meeting mine. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then it spoke, its voice a growl from the depths of the earth. Welcome home. I didn't run. I didn't scream. Couldn't. And now, as I write this, I feel it. The pull, the whispers, the cold, dark hand wrapping around me, pulling me back to that place over and over. It never lets go. I don't know how long it's been since I stepped into that barn. Time doesn't make sense here. Feels like years have passed, yet it also feels like no time has passed at all. The fog never lifts. The whispers never stop. The barn is never empty. And the thing with the gaping hole for a face, it's always there, standing in the shadows, watching me. I've lost track of how many times I've tried to leave, how many times I've thought I could escape. Every time I think I'm free, I wake up back here, on this cursed land. I don't know if I'm dreaming or if I've crossed some point of no return, but either way, I can't leave. The creature, it no longer speaks to me in words. It doesn't need to. I can feel it in my bones, in my soul. The pull is constant. The hunger it has for me is relentless. It wants me, and I'm beginning to think it will never stop wanting me. I see them now, the others. I didn't know at first. I thought I was the only one, trapped here, abandoned and forgotten. But I've seen them, there in the corners, in the shadows, flickering in and out of existence, just like me. People who came here before me, people who thought they could leave, people who thought they could escape. Their faces are hollow, like the creatures, like mine. Their eyes are dark, empty, and they don't speak. They just follow me, a silent procession of lost souls, trapped in the same never-ending cycle. Some of them try to warn me, but their voices are broken, like they've forgotten how to speak or are too afraid to. Their faces are marked with the same terror that I feel. Somewhere deep inside, they know it's too late. I tried to scream for help, but there's no one to hear me. The fog is thick, the air is heavy, and the land itself seems to pull in on me, tightening around my chest. I feel like I'm suffocating, trapped in a world that is not mine, in a place that should never have been. And then the creature, it moves closer. It's always been watching, always been waiting, but now it comes closer than ever. Its shape is shifting, like it's trying to become something more, something greater, something that doesn't need to hide in the shadows anymore. And I know, deep down, somewhere in the cold pit of my soul, I know what it's waiting for. Just waiting for me to break. The others are gone now, their whispers fading into the dark. They were taken. I saw it happen. One by one, they were pulled into the creature's embrace, their bodies twisted and broken in ways I can't describe. And I'm next. I can feel it. The creature's hand is reaching for me, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand. If you ever hear about this place, if you ever hear someone mention the old farm in Kentucky, turn back. Don't go. It's not just a piece of land. It's a prison. And once it gets its claws in you, you'll never escape. I thought I could outrun it. I thought I could forget. But now, as I sit here, in the barn with the creature waiting, I understand. I understand that I am part of this story now. The whispers will continue, the fog will never lift, and the creature, it will never stop. I don't know how this will end, if it ever will. Maybe I'll finally be swallowed up by the darkness. Maybe one day someone will find this and hear the truth of what happened here. But if you do, please learn from my mistake. It's never over, and it will never let you go.